Hi, and welcome to this week's edition of Newsmakers TV, on the air since 2014 as Santa Barbara's most popular and provocative local news program, featuring analysis and commentary from Santa Barbara's top journalists. I'm Jerry Roberts. It is Friday, May 19th, 2023. I'm very pleased to welcome back Lily Dallow, digital content editor for KEYT, Nick Welsh, executive editor and award-winning columnist for the Santa Barbara Independent, and Josh Molina, political reporter, journalism educator, man of mystery, and host of the Santa Barbara Talks podcast. Thank you all for coming. Lots to talk about this week. Board of Supervisors vote themselves a big raise, big political and policy fight over the future of the county jail, the latest on housing and homelessness. But let's start with a story of considerable historic significance, and that involves the annual Big Fiesta Parade. Lily, the Grand Marshal of the Fiesta Parade this year, kind of a surprise. Who is it and what's the significance?
Yeah, so she is 84 years old. Her name is Ernestine Ignacio de Soto. And if you could please excuse the loud garbage truck outside of my house right now. She was chosen as the Grand Marshal for this year's Fiesta Parade, which has, like you said, a lot of historic significance given she is of Barbareño Chumash descent. And as Fiesta is a celebration of Spanish culture, Spanish-speaking culture in Santa Barbara, it's, you know, quite incredible to have somebody at the front whose culture was there before, you know, the Spanish came. So
yeah, and the parade will be going right over Chumash land. Now you're going to interview her next week, I understand, but we were talking before the show about you setting it up and talking to her on the phone. And tell us again what the first thing she told you was.
So, well, first I was expecting a call, not from her, but from somebody else to set up the interview. And so I was first a little taken aback when she said, "Hi, this is Ernestine." I was like, "Oh, okay, hi." And I gave her, you know, a very scattered pitch of what I was thinking for a story. And I said, "So how does that sound?" And she goes, as long as I don't have to bend over." It's like, you don't have to worry about any of that.
Ernestine, you know, I'm sure you've already reported this, but her mother was the last Chumash native speaker in Santa Barbara, and she brings with her just a massive amount of history and community engagement, and she doesn't have much filter, and she will say what's on her mind, and sometimes it makes you cringe, and other times it makes you go, "Thank God for Ernestine." But she definitely, the fact that she is doing it is wonderful, and it really kind of shows how much Old Spanish days and how we celebrate Fiesta has changed. I mean, I was saying before the show, and I'll shut up, but when I started working here, we would report on Old Spanish days as describing it as where white guys dressed up as Mexicans to dance on the graves of the Indians. And that didn't go over too well, as you might imagine. And now you have Ernestine. You know, she is a serious badass with a big heart, and has really helped promote the cause of Chumash history here.
Yeah, well, and you know, there's been some controversy over the years, obviously, about the connection between the Chumash and Fiesta and Spanish colonialism and the good padres at the mission and so on. I remember the first year I came, I think was 2002, and at Fiesta Pequeña on Wednesday night, you know, there's always a big dance performance on the steps of the mission, and there was a Chumash group, and one of the younger members of the tribe, you know, came up the stairs and tried to disrupt it because he felt that it was, I guess, sacrilegious or disrespectful of history and stuff. Is that the kind of thing that you're going to get into with Ernestine in terms of the history, Lily?
Yeah, so you know what's especially interesting about her story? I actually spent time yesterday doing some background research, and she has an hour-long documentary that I watched, the whole thing, that she did in partnership with the Santa Barbara Museum of Natural History. And she talks about how and like when she was younger and she left home after having or when she was pregnant, and then she was away from her family and fairly disconnected for a while, and then once she came back to her family, though, it was kind of in full force, and that's when she really became invested in her whole heritage, and then learning that you know, her history was kind of disappearing. Like she saw it leaving and she grabbed onto it, and she met this man named John Johnson, who is an anthropologist. I think I said that
Yeah.
right. And he works at the museum, and he was very much interested in Mary Yee because she was the last non-native speaker of the Barbareño Chumash language. And when they met, you know, Ernestine was like, that was actually my mother. So they together just started pulling out all of these kind of like, you know, ancient artifacts, and she just started seeing all of this history of her family and putting it all together, because if she hadn't done it, it could have so easily just disappeared, you know. So she was you know, she just is really into preserving her family story. And she told, in that documentary, she tells the story like from, I think, her from the 1700s, and she tells it in her point of view because she takes on her relatives, you know, spirit as she's explaining the story. So there's a lot of history there. And then, you know, one of the biggest moments was when the Spanish people came in, and then they built the mission, and so it would, you know, and then that's kind of when the Chumash went back into, they went into the mountains and the Trail of Tears, and then just kind of the, you know, battle between them, and how they started out with so many Chumash, like I think around 20,000 or something, and they resulted with about 3,000, and so it's just been getting smaller and smaller, and she's really working to preserve that whole story. So
Yeah.
with
Do we
all
know
that
if
behind
she's-
her, yeah.
I'm sorry. I didn't mean- Is she going to ride a horse, or is she going to be in one of the carriages from the
I
carriage?
think she's gonna be in one of the carriages that goes down. She'll be right there in the front.
Josh, you're approaching middle age very rapidly, but you, unlike Nick, you did not cover the original Fiesta Parade in 1925. But you are old enough to remember when the scandal of a couple of the flower girls exchanging a peck on the cheek, and the way things have changed. That was about 20 years ago. What was that all about? Remember that?
Yeah, that was back in our old time at the daily paper, and I don't remember all the details, but I remember there was a same-sex kiss involving flower girls, and it happened in public view, and somebody complained and wanted these girls removed from one of the girls removed from the ceremonies. And it was 20 years ago. I don't remember all the details, but I remember that being a big thing, a big, you know, scandal at the time. And we wrote about it and covered it. But I mean, thank God things have changed. I don't think that would be a scandal today, rightfully so. You know, it
So
should not be.
today we have, you know, openly gay El Presidente, and you know,
And the
just to
first
round it
male
out,
spirit.
this year's spirit is a young teenage guy dancer who is the son of former police department public information officer Riley Harwood. So this is sort of turning everything a little bit upside down in a really nice way.
Yeah, in a really nice way. And Lily, are you going to end up having to cover the Fiesta Parade, do you think? Have you done that before? Good
Yeah,
job.
last year I ran the live streams for it. So
Oh, okay. All right.
yeah, it was fun. I got to, once I got it going, I even got to go and stand on the sidelines for the parade just for a little bit, and I got confetti dumped on me by a couple of firefighters.
You got your
Yeah.
Coscarones. You know, Nick has a Coscarone war, a multi-decade Coscaroni wore with Salud Carbajal, our elected congressman. They always get each other a couple times. All right, well, good. That's a good story to start on, I think. Josh, you had a piece about our Board of Supervisors this week deciding that they weren't being paid enough and therefore voting themselves a pay. I thought that we had taken all this out of the hands of the elected officials, that they weren't supposed to be approving their own salary increases and stuff. But I guess I was thinking of the legislature or something else. What happened with that?
Well, the Board of Supervisors, they make about 104 grand a year, and
Plus
benefits, and it takes it up to 140, 150, depending on length of service and how long they've been there. And so they, according to the staff studies looking at Anaheim, Long Beach, LA markets, say they're 30% underpaid. And so they proposed this increase. They got an increase last year, I should say 2 years ago, but now they're getting another 5% increase. And then they've tied it now to the CPI for those markets. So every year they're going to get a maximum of a 5% increase. The CPI, I don't know if it's 5 or higher, but that's what it's going to be. And I think that,
was there any controversy about it?
there was no, the way it was presented, this is really classic government, and it's also a failure of our media, quite frankly, myself included. We just kind of didn't cover it. We didn't pay attention to it. I only knew about it because somebody tipped me off about it. I don't cover the Board of Supervisors unless it's like a housing issue or something. And I followed it, and it was real quick. It was real fast. And so Bob Nelson, the 4th district supervisor, he voted no. He didn't really offer any comments. I followed up in the meeting. He said, I don't think my constituents would want me approving an increase in my own salary. There's a couple of things here. There's plenty of evidence to suggest that they should be paid more because of the high cost of housing here. And 104 grand is about the median income, for Santa Barbara. So there's plenty of evidence that, okay, these people are not, it's not like some Bell issue situation where somebody's making 400 grand or something like that. It's not like that. But I think the look, the optics, as people like to say, is I don't know that we should have this mechanism where they're approving their own salaries. It feels odd. It feels weird.
I will dare to say we should not.
None of us are able to do that. And it's, in journalism, we always talk about how the perception of bias is the same as a bias in our coverage. So if people believe you cannot be fair, you may as well not be fair, because you're never going to change their minds. And if you're proving your own salary, it's really hard to be objective in that, because you're putting money in your own pocketbook. They increase their car allowance. The chair gets a little bit more of a stipend. And so I think it's that. Bob Nelson voted no.
Good for Bob Nelson. That was, because really when you think about it, do you think that the fact that our county supervisors are underpaid, are we seeing an exodus of political talent to other counties where they're paid more? No, they are kind of stuck here, and you want them to be in the ballpark, but when you're looking at a budget where a lot of people are going to be taken in the shorts, because the state's looking at a $31 billion shortfall, and all that's going to trickle down here, and already we can't hire people for so many positions because of the high cost of housing. I think this would have been a good time for the rest of them to sort of take a page from Bob Nelson's book and say, you know what, we're all right. It'd be nice to have a little bit extra, but we're doing all right without it. And when we go into negotiations and tell people how they're not going to get it,
yes,
we can at least say we did it ourselves. I don't, as you say, Josh, there's arguments both ways, but I think this was a good time for them to put the brakes on.
And let me just say one thing, Jerry, too. This is the weekly Doss Williams criticism of the show. But I'm going to do it this time.
Who are you talking?
Doss needs to do less personalization,
self-dramatization
on these issues.
Jerry, let Josh talk.
Doss Williams needs to, I know Doss says he doesn't watch this show. I find that hard to believe. But he needs to do less personalization of these issues, because he goes up there and he says, my wife locks herself in the cave and our kids know not to approach her. And she needs to do that because he can't afford to be a supervisor unless he has her income. And that's really deeply out of touch with everyday people, because Doss Williams has been elected for 20 years. He started the state assembly for 6. He made 80 grand plus 80 grand a year, 80 plus. That's not the fight and the struggle that we are after when we're talking about housing for low income and middle income workers. That is not the fight and the struggle. Okay. He's doing great. He's doing well off. Okay. And Bob Nelson's point was, I knew the deal when I ran for supervisor. Now, maybe Bob has more money than Doss. Okay. Maybe he's independently, I don't know. But the point is that if you choose to be in public service, that is the trade-off. And you also have to have the ability to, like Nick said, you know, this looks really bad, and sure, I can get it, but I don't really want it, and I'm not going to do it. And that goes a long way toward people respecting you in the long run. If you're seen as consistently self-serving all the time, over time, the people who were your friends will start to splinter off, and you're going to find yourself with less support as you try to continue to ascend and climb the ladder. And so I think he needs to do less personalization, because you know, that struggle is not the struggle of the person who's trying to make it, who's commuting from Santa Maria, Oxnard, Lompoc, working multiple jobs, cleaning homes, who earns a fraction of that, 104 grand.
Yeah. How's it look to you, Lily, as a young person trying to get by in Santa Barbara? Does 104,000 seem like they're underpaid?
You know, if I could give myself a 5% raise, I'd do it. But I mean, I definitely agree with what Josh is saying about you know, being a little out of touch there, because I feel like by doing that, I mean, not to put words in his mouth, but it could be seen as you know, he's reaching for relativity. He's like, well, my wife works this hard, and I want to be able, you know, he's like, if you were in my shoes, but then like Josh was saying, that's not the struggle. It's like, if you're going to ask people to look at it relatively towards you, you should do it the other way around and be like, oh, you know what? There's people out there that probably have never seen $104,000 in their life. Like, you know, and I'm the one that's leading them. I mean, I don't know. I'm kind of talking a little over my head here, but that's how I feel about it. Yeah.
All right. I think we can get a
You
unanimous.
think you beat that horse to death?
I think we can get a unanimous vote. And Nick, I want you to know that my tongue is bleeding from biting it so much.
I'm so glad to hear that.
And all right, on other business before the soups this week was the never-ending saga of the county jail and Sheriff Bill Brown's attempt to stand up against the new think in terms of criminal justice policy. What
You know, I gotta cut you off at the knees right there.
Huh?
I gotta cut you off at the knees right there. I know you like this get off my lawn, grumpy, you know, white guy routine, but this was more a matter of fiscal restraint, and how much money can we possibly spend on building new jails and staffing them when we can't even staff the jails that we have now, and we're paying $12 million already this year in mandatory overtime for jailers because we can't fill the spot. And it wasn't the new think people. What was really striking to me this time was that they really leading the charge was Mona Miyasato, the county executive. And she said, let's look at these numbers. You know, 2005, you know, I don't have the numbers off at my fingertip, but the jail had a lot more people in it, and it had a lot fewer correctional people working in it. and the budget was a lot lower than it is now, with a lot fewer people in it and a lot more jailers. So what the problem is that the South County jail that was built 60 years ago is kind of a Franken jail. It is a bunch of disparate parts that were cobbled together sort of in an ad hoc fashion, and there is no cohesive whole to it, and they're all crumbling. And really, in a rational universe, you would just bring in the bulldozer and knock the whole thing over and rebuild, but that would be so prohibitively expensive, given the fact that we just built a new North County jail, that we can't afford to do that. What we do have is information that was derived during COVID, indicating that you could have you have room for a lot fewer inmates than we traditionally have had, which is somewhere around the neighborhood of 1,100 is what we're rated for. And typically the number has been about 1,000 for many years, and now it's about 771. And they're trying to get it so that it's going to be 728, and that would be the maximum amount. And the thinking here is that we can, if we get the mentally ill people who are in jail, who are really there because, not because they're criminals, but because they have a mental health problem, there's like there's about 60 people in the jail who have serious acute mental health problems. You have 117 people in the jail who are either mental health or substance abuse problems, who allegedly, everybody agrees, should not be in jail but should be in treatment. And so the prayer and the hope and the calculation is that if we divert more effectively, we will not need to have so many bodies locked up, and we can do this without compromising public safety.
Yeah.
Bill Brown showed up, and he was quite powerful, and he showed up with 3 police chiefs, and they all said, you know what, we're really nervous about these numbers, and we're not at all comfortable. Now, and I'm going to shut up in just a second.
Yeah.
Bill Brown is probably one of the best politicians in Santa Barbara County, and strangely, he's also one of the least effective. And by that last part, he did not work the supervisors. He did not go to the supervisors beforehand and say, hey, here's my plan B. Here's what we do. And maybe he wouldn't have gotten anywhere, because the fiscal issues are as intense as the social justice issues right now. And if you're Mona Miyasato, and every year the big hemorrhage that you have to deal with is mandatory overtime into jail, you have to do something about it.
Yeah, well, but there is, there is a significant philosophical and policy debate which underpins all this. And I got 2 words for you: San Francisco. They love letting people out of jail in San Francisco. San Francisco is the only city in California that is for taxes and crime.
We are in San Francisco.
You can see what is happening on the streets there. And I
know
that the whole liberal majority on the Board of Supervisors has been pushing Brown for years to do
okay,
that.
but
COVID offered a convenient excuse. Oh, see how this works so well.
no, actually, they brought in a consultant. They said, let's not look at COVID. Let's look at sort of regular time and what are our opportunities for diversion. And that guy came up with the number 600. He said, if we do the ankle bracelets and electronic monitoring and blah, 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 we can get by with 600 given our projected population growth. Now, Bill Brown says your population projections are a bunch of hooey. We're growing a lot more than you think we're growing. He had arguments. And it's a 3-2 split on the Board of Supervisors. It is not like San Francisco, and we aren't San Francisco.
Not yet. We're getting there. We're getting there.
All right.
With our fine city council. Speaking of which, Josh, So the council decided they were going to take direct action on building some of this housing with this housing fund that they set aside. But they ended up with this Rubik's Cube approach to how the money was going to be spent and what it was going to be spent on, to the extent that it got sort of diluted so much that nobody was going to get much of anything. So now they're back to square one. Can you kind of unpack that housing fund thing?
It's a really odd situation. Santa Barbara has a housing authority, which is highly regarded, has built tremendous affordable housing projects, Section 8 vouchers for the community. Great job that they have done over the years. Rob Fredericks, Kip Skamansky, the director, Bob Pearson before him, before them, great reputation. So in the context of these challenges that we're having with housing, there's been talk of creating a housing fund that can help people in a variety of ways. It could be to fight tenant evictions. It could be to acquire land, to maybe start development, or for the city to be involved with housing development. There's a number of different ways to give the money to people. And the problem with this was it's duplicative, and it came out of a meeting. It came out of discussions from the dais on the council. And a long time ago, Kristen Sneddon wanted to do something. She wanted to start a fund with 200 or 300 grand. The council said that's not enough. And then Eric Friedman and Megan Harmon, with the help of consultant Ben Romo, came forward with this other project where they're like, hey, we can leverage money to get it from all of these organizations. He did this white paper, and they jumped on that, and they said, yeah, let's do this. And they put in like 2.8 million to start this home fund. And so they're trying to figure out,
Why don't they just give it to the housing authority? That's what I don't understand.
that's what I think the housing authority would like. It's like this, hey, we want this. We need to do this. One of the problems
We know
with
how
the
to do
AUD
it.
program is that now the housing authority, which used to be able to strategically go around and find pieces of land to build projects, is now competing with the private market because they're buying, they're bidding more, they're paying more, and then they're turning them to AUD projects. So the housing authority said, why are you creating a program where this money is competing with our proven legacy of what we do?
No, that's a really good. I think the missing piece that some of the advocates of this were hoping to address is that the whole rent eviction issue and the whole idea of mass evictions by the sort of investor class of real estate company coming in and buying up apartment complexes, that you need to have a better funded defense paid for by the city of Santa Barbara if need be, to advocate on behalf of tenants being evicted. And I think that is a missing link here, and is, they're not crazy to want to fill it, but I think that they've kind of boxed themselves into this sort of, as you say, Rubik's Cube mess, trying to figure out how to dispense this money.
Yeah. Well, there was some good news on the homelessness front. I guess it's good news. Nick, you had the thing about the tiny homes now on Hollister. That's a good program, huh?
It has been an extremely effective program so far. Down on there's a 34 unit tiny home for interim homeless housing on Santa Barbara Street on the 1000 block, and that has been, by all reckonings, without drama, without nuisance to the neighbors, tightly run. Seems like it's getting people off the street. The sort of heat on State Street of people just sitting around or laying in doorways and making people feel uncomfortable because there's homeless people present. That has gone down. So it seems like that is like a great model, and they're trying that out. Instead of 33 or 34, they're talking 90 units out there at the old juvenile hall at 4500 block of Hollister. And the neighbors were caught completely off guard. I will say the notice this time around was very late in coming, and there's one week where the neighbors show up for a meeting in a church, and the next week the Board of Supervisors are signing a contract. That is lickety split by Santa Barbara standards. And if you're a neighbor and you are to be excused for feeling like saying the train has left the station and you just got run over. But the reality is that there are a lot of 60 to 90 people living in encampments in that neighborhood already, and that this is going to bring them inside. It's going to have them surrounded with a host of services, mental health, drug addiction, substance abuse, how to get their lives back together so that they can move into some theoretical housing that presumably might exist 6 to 2 years down the road, that's more long term.
Yeah. The only objection I have is it's calling it tiny homes. Lily, I don't know if you're with me, but it just, I hear that and I just see the like little tiny people sort of living. That seems like the worst, the worst appellation since
they don't call it that. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Police. Oh, that's just you when your headline is.
They were called tiny homes now, but now they say, could you please not use that term? Call it cabins. We like to call it cabins. It's sort of like, we don't call it pot, we call it cannabis. We don't call them tiny homes, we call them cabins.
All right, we got to get out. I want to cover two more things real quick. One arrival and one departure. Lily, you had a piece, and we just touched on this last week about the new, I guess, president. I always forget what the proper title out at City College was. Now,
superintendent/president.
Yeah. Now, who is that, and is this a good thing or a bad thing?
I think it's a good thing. I'm no expert on her as a person, but Dr. Erica Andrihonas, I believe is how you pronounce her last name. She has a ton of City College experience, including going to the City College itself, I believe, if I remember that correctly. And she worked at Los Angeles. She worked in Los Angeles and at the Pasadena City College and oversaw a $300 million budget. But one thing that I mean, this is just probably a little off topic, but I personally found it really interesting was, I have it up right here. Her dissertation, like when, she was at school, was a cultural history of American cookbooks published between 1945 and 1960, and was focused on the ways that cookbooks communicated gender roles and middle-class values in the post-war years.
Ah, that sounds interesting.
But yeah, I think it'll be good.
That is interesting.
The
Right?
hegemony of Betty Crocker.
Maybe you should, the Independent should reprint the entire dissertation, Nick, because I think there's an overlay here. I think it's connected to the whole
I think so.
Fiesta as well. And Josh, the economic development director for the city, who people argued about whether we should have one or not have one. The poor guy, arise in the depths of the pandemic, and now it reminds me of that old C.K. Chesterton line about journalism is shouting Lord Jones is dead to people who never knew Lord Jones was alive. What happened to poor old Jason?
Well, the sheen has worn off Rebecca Bjork as city administrator. That's what I'll tell you. The budget cuts are happening, and one of the positions that she has eliminated was this economic development manager position. And poor Jason Harris. This guy gets hired under Paul Casey from Santa Monica, and he comes up here. He's got no budget, no staff. I've talked about him on this show. We've all talked to him. the nicest guy in the world, but it's like eating a delicious dessert, you know, and afterward you're like, why did I do that? It tasted good for a minute, but there's no substance there. There's no nutrients. And,
Well,
and
he had
Jason,
all the responsibility and none of the authority.
he talked really well, but it's really hard to have overnight change when it comes to making a economic impact on State Street with problems that long preceded COVID. And so he didn't exactly take off the way that some people wanted. He had all the sound bites. He said the right things, but there was not much substance and core there. And you could blame, well, it's not his fault. Could somebody else have done it? Blah, blah, blah. The bottom line is he was making about 184 grand. That position's out of the budget. He's leaving soon, and the city's basically given up on economic development right now. Rebecca told me they might hire this ombudsman or something, but there's a lot of stuff going on. They want to cut an after-school program at Monroe for $63,000. The parents are outraged. They've increased the fees for summer camps. So they're doing all these things to raise revenues and make cuts. And Rebecca is an engineer. And so there's some conversations about what's happening at City Hall in the context of how these impacts are benefiting or hurting people on the ground.
You know, just to follow up, I mean, with Jason, you're right. I mean, he super articulate guy, sort of like listening to an extended guitar solo. He could just talk. But when I asked council members, like, how did he move the needle? What does he actually do? I mean, nobody said he didn't do anything, but nobody knew what he did. He does get a lot of credit for getting a business improvement district over in Montecito's Coast Village Road. So he gets points for that. But in terms of downtown Santa Barbara, where who knows, you know, it remains, you know, if you know the Parklets added some life to the street, but there's still a lot of vacant buildings and a lot of vacant properties, and it's unclear what Jason could have done or what has been done.
Well, and then, you know, when the Dave Davis committee came in and kind of usurped, you know, took up all the oxygen about what was going to be the future of State Street, that kind of left him holding the bag too. All right, Lily, I'm sure you were very excited to read Nick's cover story about Chubby Checker. You're going to be you're going to be first in line for the block party. For when is the block party, Nick?
Saturday afternoon to 8 o'clock at night.
This Saturday.
Yeah, this Saturday.
Tomorrow, May 20th. So have you got big plans to spend the whole day there, Lily?
Yeah, I'll be camping out front. I gotta get in there first.
Had you ever heard of the twist before Nick?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Actually have.
All right.
The Fat Boys from the 80s had a song
Yeah.
with Chubby Checker in it. And so, you know, his popularity at least extended a little bit to, you know, contemporary people. But that's how I learned of Chubby Checker. They did a duet together.
Yeah.
No, I thank Nick for doing that because I was sure Chubby Checker was long dead. So that
81 years old, still going strong.
it's good. Well, see, he'd be a youngster in the United States Senate. We don't want to talk about that. So, Josh, who you got on the podcast?
Oh, Jerry, you're going to love this. Okay. I have Greg Gandrud on my podcast. And I don't know if you know, but he was in the hospital for 44 days.
Oh.
He did not get the COVID-19 vaccine. And he almost died. He was on a ventilator. He was in a medically induced coma.
Oh
He
my
talks
God.
about his story there. We also talk about him being openly gay 20 years ago on the Carpinteria City Council, and him being a Republican. He's backing DeSantis, and just sort of how he's had to deal with, you know, being an out gay Republican and not really having an island, but now things are a little bit better now for him. So we talk about all the Republican issues. You're going to love it, Jerry. It's going
But
to.
did you did he talk about how he had to sell his house because of cannabis?
Yes, he talked about how he and his husband moved from Carp to Ventura because the Van Wingerdens were growing cannabis, and he said the oils and soap they were doing
Well, that's
to
probably
diffuse the
maybe that's why
smell
he's sick.
made his husband sick, who has asthma, and so he bailed. So it's actually a really good conversation podcast that we had.
That sounds interesting. That's good. That's a good one. All right, Nick, I don't think you can top Chubby Checker. I think you should go out on top, pal. And you
I
know,
think that's a good point. I would take your advice.
are you going to be there tomorrow?
I have to.
You're going to have live coverage. You're going to is it
Yeah,
independent?
live coverage. The
Lily,
Independent
you should
provides
live stream it.
coverage.
Lily, I'm telling you, you gotta.
I'll be
you'll
there.
break the server. I'm telling you, if you do that. All right, Lily Dallow, Josh Molina, Nick Welsh. Thank you all very much for being here. Thank you all for watching, and we will see you next time on Newsmakers.